Hey guys, welcome. My name is Allison if you're new here, and today I'm going to be answering questions sent in by all of you guys that were about learning Japanese, how I learned Japanese stuff. I'm just gonna do the video in English though because it's just a lot easier. So if you're new here, welcome. I'm a grad student at the University of Tokyo here in Tokyo. And I'm not fluent in Japanese by any means. I'm only in 2. But I've been learning Japanese for so many years now, it's like embarrassing. And I've tried a ton of different methods, different resources, all that. So I'm just gonna talk about my experiences learning Japanese. It may not apply to everyone. This is just how I feel, how I learned it, my experiences. It may be different for you. All right, so let's get right on into it then. Is living in Japan hard if you're not fluent in Japanese? So I think there's 2 types of people who are gonna come to Japan. There's expats, and then there's like the normal people. So like expats are kind of gonna come over here with a job. Most likely they've been transferred from their company back home. They're gonna come with the support system. They're gonna probably have more money, that type of thing. These people aren't gonna have a problem living in Japan mostly because a lot of the harder things to do here are probably gonna be supported by the company or just money. And then like the more everyman, I guess, it is a lot harder if you're not fluent, but I would say just the difference between 0 Japanese and speaking in 5 and 4 Japanese is going to be huge. Seriously, any little bit of Japanese you know is going to make living here a lot easier. But even if you come over not knowing anything, especially if you move to like Tokyo, the big cities are very much set up for tourism. And there's tons of English signage, English support, that type of thing. You can definitely get by. But I do encourage you to learn even a little bit of Japanese. Just reading hiragana and katakana is going to make a huge difference. How did you learn kanji? There are a lot of different ways to learn kanji, and I encourage you to try out all the different types and see what works for you, because what I'm about to say may not apply to you. So personally for me, I think it is important to learn them in order, and there are different orders. So by in order, I basically mean the JLPT level, I think is fine. That or like the elementary school grade level, that type of thing. Personally, I don't really like the memorization of just the meaning and then going from there. I forget what it's called. And the reason why I think learning them in order of like easiest to hardest is that like the easier ones are gonna appear a lot more usually. So by starting with the kanji that are in 5 or like 1st grade in Japan, you're gonna start off by learning the most common kanji. And another tip I have is learning the radicals. So by radicals, what I mean is the parts of a kanji. So you're gonna see the same parts in a bunch of different kanji. So by learning the radicals, you will have a hint towards the meaning, and you'll have a pretty good guess at what the pronunciation of the kanji is gonna be. It's not gonna apply to all of them, of course, but it's a good like backup if you're not sure. And once you start recognizing all the different radicals, I think it's going to become a lot easier to differentiate the kanji too. As you may know, for learning kanji, my belief is that you don't need to learn how to write them all, because you don't need to write them all. I would say just learn the writing for about the first 200, and from there you're probably fine, and you're probably gonna get a good idea of how to write kanji in general. And of course, I like wani-kani. It's not perfect. The order that you learn kanji in isn't my preference, honestly. So maybe Anki, just other types of SRS-based flashcards are gonna be good for that. So next question is, what is your goal now that you've achieved everyday competency? This is hard, because once you hit everyday competency, like once you're able to go to the store and you don't have that many problems, that type of thing, then the motivation for learning Japanese, I think it goes way down, at least in my experience, because now I can do basically everything on my own. So where do you go from there? I'm still struggling with this one, honestly. For me right now, my goal is to just get more comfortable with the grammar that is like at N2 level, because even if I passed N2, in reality, I don't use N2 grammar or even vocabulary that much in real life. But that's just because of the lifestyle I lead, because even though I live in Japan, my work and my classes are in English. So I would really like to start incorporating N2 grammar and stuff into my everyday speech. And in addition to that, I also want to learn more specific vocabulary that is related to what I study, because I'm in grad school. So that's where I'd like to go next. How do you get better at speaking Japanese when you don't have a speaking partner? So what I did after I went back to America after studying abroad in Japan in college is I started talking to myself all the time in the car. Even if you don't drive, just make a habit of talking to yourself So like, let's say you're listening to the radio, see if you can translate it out loud. Or honestly, I would just recount the events of my day out loud to myself in the car, like have a monologue, complain about things, think about what I want to eat, make decisions, that type of thing, but all spoken out loud in Japanese. Even if it's not perfect Japanese, even if I'm not sure if my grammar structure is right, if there's a better word, just speaking is important. And then of course there's online language exchanges and stuff, but really if you can't do that type of thing, I would just encourage you to speak out loud to yourself, to anyone, as much as you can. It really helped me a lot. I seriously did it like every day on the way to work. How do you get past just translating Japanese to English in your head and move on to understanding Japanese? I totally know what you're talking about because I had this problem too and I wondered it myself. So in the beginning, when you're starting to learn Japanese, inevitably it's gonna be like translating. So you're gonna have like a lag. When the Japanese goes in your brain, you're probably gonna translate it to English, then translate your reply from English to Japanese, and then say it out loud. That type of thing. I think the only solution for this is just getting used to Japanese. It will happen where there's a day where you realize you just understand it, especially at the very common thing. The more often you hear something like, for example, let's just say, you know, you keep getting asked, when is your birthday? When is your birthday? When is your birthday? And maybe you think about it a few times, but then eventually it's just gonna come out very naturally. You're not gonna think about it. So with these type of basic replies, it is kind of like a script in your head, but at the same time, I think this really will help you just get used to speaking without having to think and struggle in your mind. It will happen though, I promise. I'd say around in 4, in 3. At the basic level, it's gonna happen, but you know, once you start talking about complicated things, like for example, if I go to the ward office, I have to think about what they're saying to me and then, you know, do the translation stuff in my head. Just like when I was, you know, in 5 and had to think about what food I like. Just keep practicing, and before you know it, you'll speak Japanese without thinking about it. Next, I got a lot of questions about how to avoid like burnout, getting lazy, just losing motivation for speaking Japanese, for learning Japanese. This is gonna happen no matter what you study. It's not just a Japanese thing. My advice is don't overdo it. A lot of people, especially in the beginning, they want to study for like 4 hours a day. They want to really get into it really quickly. And I don't recommend this because you will run into burnout no matter how much you want to learn the language, no matter how much you enjoy it. You're not gonna enjoy it eventually. You have to take breaks and you have to just do it in moderation or you're gonna hate it. So if you just feel that already, like you don't wanna keep studying every day, you don't wanna do it, just don't study every day, first of all. That's awful, I think. And I would say just kind of pivot from learning through like a textbook or something and just go into immersion more, like listening to Japanese music, watching dramas, watching anime, YouTube, that type of thing, and just take a break. Seriously, it's fine to take a week off as long as you're continuing with these other activities that's gonna get the Japanese in your brain. You're not gonna lose as much Japanese as you think. I wouldn't recommend just cutting off all Japanese altogether. I've done it. It's not good, you're gonna backslide, but cut back. Seriously, if you feel like you're about to be burned out, just cut back. It's not worth it. How do you keep track of your progress? I don't really do that, I guess. I think once you like finish a textbook, once you finish a chapter, the longer you study it, you'll just notice that there were things you at one point had no idea what meant, and now you're gonna understand it very easily. So even right now, I feel like I'm not making any progress in my Japanese because honestly I don't have much time to study it. But then I'll go have a conversation with someone and we'll talk about something I didn't think I could talk about, and I'll be like, oh, I've improved, I've gotten better, it's working. I don't know, some people like make charts and things, and if that's your personality, go for it. I'm not into that type of thing. What pens do you use to take notes in Japanese? I recommend the smaller pen or pencil, the better. So for example, my favorite is the 0.38 Muji. So it's just like a skinny little pen, you know, and the smaller the tip is, the easier it's going to be to write kanji. Kanji can be very hard to write from, in my experience, with a thicker pen top tip thing. And it may look a little messy at first. It's probably gonna keep looking messy for a long time. Mine still isn't very cute. But I think the important thing when writing Japanese is being able to see every stroke you do, because you're still learning Japanese. And if you like go reread your notes and you can't make out every single stroke, it's not going to be good for your learning. How do you learn grammar? This is personally what I struggle with the most. It's very hard for me. So if you have any advice, I would love to hear it too. I think textbooks are great for grammar. Textbooks have a place, and this is where they shine, grammar. Because there are so many rules, little tiny rules, little exceptions that you're probably gonna miss out on if you don't consult a textbook at least. So what I do is like I'll rewrite the point, I'll highlight it, and then try to write some example sentences with it and say it out loud. You can also make flashcards for grammar points if you'd like. Personally, I think the best way just to learn the grammar is to be exposed to it. So that's why watching dramas, anime, reading is so important. So then a few different people asked me about a schedule. How do you like plan out learning Japanese? Do you have like a schedule of what you do? I don't. I wish I did. I think this is gonna depend on your lifestyle. Personally, I do not have a regular like set lifestyle, I guess, at all. I have some like loose things in the week, but in general, it's very unstructured, and how I use my time varies a lot from week to week. However, if you do work like a full-time job, you get home at 6 o'clock every day, I think it's a lot easier to make a plan. And I think whether you need a plan or not, or like a schedule, is going to be dependent on your personality. For example, I know people who like first thing they do when they wake up is study Japanese for like 30 minutes. And that works for them. So if you can, I would try it, but I can't do that, honestly. So what I do is I will just try to fit it in when I can. Honestly, during the semester, I don't have time to learn Japanese on top of my work and everything. But like during breaks, I'll be like, okay, this week I want to finish up to this chapter in this book. So we have to make it happen by studying like 5 different times. I think as long as you set like short-term goals for yourself and you try to meet them, it'll work out. Even if you fall a little short, it's fine. I don't know. I'm not good at schedules. So, however, if you're working for like the JLPT or something like that, I think it's a lot easier to stick to a schedule. And I did when I was studying for N2. Like I would study for, I don't know, like 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week in the months up to it. And then the month of the JLPT, I would spend like all my free time doing Japanese. I think it just works to have like a long-term goal and then have short-term goals in there that you can steadily build up to. How do you learn vocabulary? So I really like flashcards for this. SRS based like Anki if you can. However, I did use a lot of physical flashcards back in college for this. Personally, I think using like a textbook for vocab is good too, at least just to pull the words from. So like for example, I have the Soul Matome Into book here for vocabulary, and I like this for vocabulary because it's organized by themes. So like this one's about like different apartment stuff, that type of thing. I personally find it easier learning vocabulary when it's divided into like different situations and themes like this. How you learn is of course may be different, but you can't just use the textbook of course to learn vocabulary. You have to supplement it by like for example, like I'll like write it out like 3 times in a list, and I'll go through it all, and then I'll review this list at work if I have free time. And then I'll also do SRS based flashcards if I need to or if I can. But then once you do have a general idea of the vocab, I think it's a lot easier to pick it up in the like immersion materials like dramas, anime, manga, that type of thing. How do you feel about journaling in Japanese? So I did do this actually in college, and it's definitely hard at the beginning. Even now, I think writing is probably my weakest skill because I don't write in Japanese. I think having the expectation that you can say what you want to say in Japanese like the same as you would in English, at least at the beginning of your Japanese language learning journey, it's just impossible. So just don't even expect it. Just stick to the basics, stick with what you've learned. I think journaling, the most important thing is reinforcement of what you've already learned. Maybe you can throw a few new vocab words, maybe even a grammar point in there, but I think journaling is best for just like using the grammar points you've learned in the past week. If you think about it like you're trying to incorporate what you just learned, I think it's gonna be a lot easier. And just keep it simple. Seriously, don't try to overdo it. It's just for you. How important do you think JLPT tests are? It's gonna depend on your goals, of course. So honestly, I don't think that JLPT in 5 or in 4 is gonna matter like at all, almost, in getting a job, at least in Japan, or even in America, honestly. But I'm not saying you shouldn't take them. They are good for like measuring yourself and giving you a goal to work towards. That type of thing. They definitely have their place. But from N3, N2, N1 is where the JLPT certificate becomes a lot more valuable. I would say N3 is good for getting a better English teaching job in Japan, for example. And then if you want to branch out from that, Most places are going to require N2 at least, and then a lot N1. However, I will also say nowadays having N2 is just expected of you. It's not going to put you above other applicants. It's just the bare minimum for getting in now. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, this wasn't the case. Nowadays, there's so many people. The job market is flooded. N2 is just basic. So don't just rely on the JLPT to get a job, please. Is it possible to reach N3 in only a year? I know a guy who reached N2 in 1 year. However, I don't recommend it. You shouldn't try it. He said he studied every single day for 8 hours a day. Most people do not have this type of free time to give to studying Japanese. If you do, sure, you can aim for it. You may be able to do it. I just wouldn't recommend it for the normal person studying Japanese. I think it's a bit unrealistic. I'd say N3 in a year is definitely possible if you're attending like language school, or maybe if you live in Japan. So for reference, most people attend Japanese language school in Japan for 2 years, and then when they graduate, they should have N2 or N1. It depends on the intensity of the school, of course, but for like, you know, Western people or people who just don't have a background of kanji, it's a lot harder to get to this high level. I don't know, I wouldn't recommend it, basically, I guess. You can try, it's just, I don't know if it's worth, you know, the effort. How long did it take you to easily understand an article in Japanese? So if you're talking about a news article, like from NHK, like the standard one, I still can't. Japanese news is very hard to read, and it's like another style of grammar and everything. I think Japanese newspapers are definitely in one level. I can't read them. But if we're talking about online articles, that type of thing, I'd say you can start from probably N3, depending on the subject matter, of course. But for example, I read a lot of like articles about like neighborhoods and stuff in Tokyo in Japanese, and those are pretty easy for me to understand at N2. What do you find most challenging when learning Japanese? So for me, it's writing, because I don't write ever. Unless you work for like a company where you have to write reports in Japanese, you probably won't write, or unless you like attend school in Japanese, that type of thing. Language schools in Japan, they make you write a lot though, because they're preparing a lot of the students to work in a Japanese environment. I can't write. On the flip side, what is easiest for me is listening. I'm very good at listening. Well, that sounds very braggy. Okay, I'm just, you know, once you live in Japan, you are exposed to Japanese all the time. So even though I don't speak it much or write it much, I am constantly, you know, intaking Japanese. Even when I'm teaching English, because the kids speak Japanese to each other, you know, the Japanese teacher is going to speak Japanese to them. Becoming good at listening, I think, is very easy when you live in Japan. Do you get someone to correct your work? I don't. One of my friends used the Kumon like correspondent course, and I think that's good for like N5 to like N3-ish. And basically like they'll give you a worksheet and then you'll send it back and then a teacher will correct it. Personally, I don't really use correction services in any way after I graduated college, of course, but I took formal classes for 2 years, so I had a teacher who graded my stuff. So I do think it's important for the foundations, and then after that, it's kind of like, I'll realize it on my own when I make a mistake, I guess. Or like I'll say something, I'll be like, oh, that doesn't sound right, and then afterwards I'll go look it up myself. That type of thing. Self-accountability. Recommended textbooks. It's gonna depend on your learning style. Soul Matome is very good just for a general overview. It's very basic. You can't only use it. And then I really like the Try series. I've only used it from N2, but I wish I found it sooner. Personally, I think it's just a good mix of like basic explanations and description. Like Soul Matome is a bit too simple. Like they don't go into detail much, but then Try is going to take it to the next step. And then from Try, we have Shinkansen Master, which is a wall of text. I think personally Kanzen Master is very good for JLPT. You should probably invest in it. From N2, there's no English in the book. It's only Japanese. The grammar descriptions are only in Japanese, but it goes into a lot of detail, and the groupings, I think, of grammar points is pretty good. These are the 3 series I recommend. And then of course there's other good ones too that I've used. But if I had to pick, Shinkansen Master is a necessity for the JLPT, at probably N3 up. My language school also used this, but I think Try is a lot easier to penetrate. Bruh. Okay, and finally, Do you struggle with comparing yourself to other people, with perfectionism? Of course. I think a lot of people, especially at the beginning, I used to be like very sensitive about when I made a mistake. I would feel really bad about it, but you can't grow like that. And I think what really helped me learn that was actually becoming an English teacher to small children who also have the same worries. A lot of them don't want to speak up in class because they are terrified of making a mistake in front of me. So I will tell you exactly what I tell them. You're here to learn. No one cares if you make a mistake. The more mistakes you make, the more you will grow. Even if you're not certain about something, I would seriously just try and say it anyway, because being told you're wrong, you might be like a little like traumatized about it, but I think that like slight sense of shame you might feel is gonna motivate you to remember that point even better in the future. But if you're learning in a Japanese like classroom, of course your teacher is gonna be very strict, maybe, on you. But if you go to Japan, the average Japanese person is not gonna care and they're not gonna correct you. So do not worry about that. Seriously. They are so nice. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm so sorry I could not answer everyone's question. So let me know if you guys have any advice of your own about learning Japanese. I would love to hear it down in the comments, especially because honestly, I haven't had the time to devote to learning Japanese. Since I started grad school, basically all I've been doing is like kanji and a little bit of grammar, and I'd like to step that up a bit this summer break. So thank you guys so much for watching. Again, if you are new here, my name is Allison and I am a grad student here in Japan. I post a new video every single week, so be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content about Japan in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next week. Bye!